Welcome to Better PR Now, Episode 4. In the last episode, we had a great conversation with Boston University's Professor Dustin Supa about his research on the dude deficit among undergraduate public relations students. In this episode, we visit with Professor Dave Dozier and Lou Williams on a paper they presented titled, "What's Wrong with Public Relations and How It Might Be Fixed." They provide a thoughtful assessment on the state of public relations as a profession, and they offer 4 specific steps that we might take to move our profession forward. Here we go. So we're here at the International Public Relations Research Conference. It's the 19th annual one in Miami, Florida. And I'm joined by Professor Dave Dozier from San Diego State University and Lou Williams from the Lou Williams Companies. Dave, will you give me a little background on yourself?
Yeah. Teach in the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. My content area is public relations. I've been doing that for 35 years, and prior to that I worked in both journalism and public relations.
Fantastic. Lou, how about you?
I came out of journalism as well, but practiced as a practitioner. Much of my career was on the consulting side. I ran a public relations for about 30 years.
Fantastic. So during this conference, you co-presented a study that you had done titled, "What's Wrong with Public Relations and How It Might Be Fixed." Can you talk us through what that study consisted of? And then I'd like to get into what you learned from it.
Dave, why don't you begin that, because you're the one who really had the concept for this, I think.
Well, I think a fair way to describe it is it's kind of our sort of look at the field after, you had our years of experience together, and it gets close to 100 person years of work in both the academy and in the profession. And we just took a look at where things are now and where we had hoped it would be back many years ago when we were young and enthusiastic about the future of public relations. And I think we're still enthusiastic about the possibilities. But there hasn't been a lot of change in the sorts of things that we thought were important. And so what we did in terms of the structure of our analysis of the problems in public relations is started out with a ideal model. And to be completely fair, this isn't our model. It was, you can read it in Managing Public Relations by Jim Brunig and Todd Hunt. It's also in Effective Public Relations, Glenn Broom and Bailing Shaw. It's basically a strategic management model that says basically public relations is a strategic management function. It's not a technical support, communication support function for other departments in organizations. That one of the most important things about public relations is that you have to be a part of the dominant coalition in organizations, and that's just fancy rhetoric for saying access to the C-suite or a seat at the decision-making table. And it doesn't have to be a formal relationship, it can be informal, but to be the best that we can be in public relations, we have to be able to influence organizational decision-making. Why? Because the best public relations is when you prevent problems rather than putting out fires after a problem has happened, because somebody in senior management made a decision, didn't think about the possibilities and some of the unintended consequences, and now you got a big mess, and you're the person that has to stand in front of the cameras and try to justify something that may not be justifiable.
Right.
So that's core, and then the next part of that is, okay, so why aren't we at that table? And then obviously this doesn't apply to every single organization. I've had folks come up here from IBM and General Motors say, well, wait a minute, we do have that access to the C-suite, and we do basically impact decision making. And so, okay, so make some exceptions for some people that are doing some really excellent public relations, but by and large, PR practitioners are separate from that decision making process. So how do we gain access to that? And I think part of the answer is that if you are simply providing communication support functions, you have nothing to contribute to decision making. So why would you be invited? What possible value added do you bring to the table?
Sounds like a catch-22.
Exactly. But if you think of two-way communication, that is, you're the eyes and ears of the organization as well as the mouth of the organization. You're the experts on how the public's likely to react to decisions and can anticipate unintended consequences. Senior management's not going to want to make a decision without getting your take on, okay, what do you think is going to happen if we do this? And how do you do that? Well, you do focus groups, you do analytics, web analytics, you do surveys, either you do them yourself, you do, take advantage of secondary analysis of existing surveys. You're the expert on these relationships and how organizational behavior affects those relationships. You're not afraid of evaluating your programs because if your program doesn't work, wouldn't you want to make it better? And so I think those are all part and parcel of what would make for an excellent public relations department that really does best practices.
Sounds like a continuation of the excellent study, which you were an integral part of.
Well, Jim Grunig was the principal investigator, but Lou and I have an intimate relationship with the excellent study, and our worldview is heavily influenced by it.
Right.
For sure. It really all leads to the question for the profession of asking the question, are we bringing in the best and the brightest? Are we getting people who are up to the standard that we know has to be met? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure we are. I know there are some university programs where public relations is a second choice, an alternative to what they really wanted to do. That's not unusual necessarily. I know I ask myself constantly, are we really answering the hard questions that managers and leaders really need to ask? Do we have the ability to be able to think strategically? Are we being trained to do that? And do we have the innate brightness to do that? I think the jury's out for us right now. Mm-hmm. There is a fair amount of, high interest, I guess is the phrase, high interest in numbers, and the numbers have to do with technology. Technology is queen. And technology is really nothing more than a technique, a tool that we as practitioners can use. And if we use it well, it'll work on our behalf. If we don't use it well, it won't. The numbers we're seeing have to do with everything from clicks to click-throughs. And they're really not very helpful, but we really glom onto them as if they were coming down from above, those numbers. And they're not. So we might have to get into a discussion of how we're training people. Is it the right training? And are universities innovators? Are they asking tough questions? Are they thinking outside the box for research? Is the research that we're doing today as good as the research that was done when Dave was doing it as a part of the excellence?
So, great questions. What did you find? What are your conclusions?
Well, where we ended up was trying to figure out who the enemy was, and it turns out it's us, all of us. I think that the education and public relations has moved into a very comfortable place. In our paper, we discussed the paradigm shift that Jim Grunig and Glenn Broom and a number of the Scott Cutlip and a number of the other academics that really did some very, very innovative thinking about taking public relations from this set of craft skills, what we, and Lou and I both come out of a journalism background, so these are our people, and we can say this, the notion of being a journalist in residence. You used to work for a newspaper, a TV station, now you're doing public relations, and it's basically the same job, and you're basically a distributor of messages, and that's a real comfortable place to be. I'm in a school of journalism and media studies, so it's very easy to see public relations as this communication output function, and I think we both are very adamant, very clear that you need to do that very, very well. It's not to say that that isn't important. It's to say that that's not enough. And when we start looking at what kind of preparation are we doing within the university to prepare people for strategic management, I don't think there are certainly exceptions to that, but generally across the board, I don't think we do a very good job of that. I think universities do a good job of training public relations technicians. They don't necessarily train people to be public relations strategists, public relations managers, people that can think outside of the box, think holistically, anticipate problems before they happen, and help organizations avoid unnecessary conflicts. And I think that was the academic side of it. As a side note, the research in public relations has moved into what we describe as, answering big questions to answering smaller questions.
Right. Which normally happens when a discipline matures.
Yes, it's moving from, if you will, a scientific revolution to normal science, to use some of the rhetoric of the academy, and I think we're definitely in a normal science phase, but I think it's,
Do you see that as problematic?
Yes.
Given that we don't have broad agreement on sort of central theories?
What is public relations?
Well,
we don't
right.
even have general agreement on that.
Right.
I mean, I was with a group of people last week who said, "Oh, you're a spin doctor, eh?" And then on the other hand, I was in a hotel, and there in the middle of the hotel lobby was a chair and a table, and on the top of the table it said public relations. They were guiding people to rooms and answering questions about the hotel events, etc. What is public relations?
Right. So we're drilling down into the esoteric questions, maybe before and maybe that's a normal thing, before the discipline is matured to that point. Maybe it all happens simultaneously.
I'm not sure how much the field has matured. I can remember 30, 40 years ago watching public relations managers, leaders be part of the dominant coalition. If there are more people doing it now than there was then, it's possible because there are more opportunities, but I'm not sure that it's necessarily matured. I think it's larger. I think it's more powerful, but I think it's losing some power. In many ways, the field is being subsumed by marketing. It's the worst possible thing that could happen to us.
Why is that?
Because when you get under the marketing agents, you are then all of a sudden a tool for them. Instead of thinking about strategy, you're doing publicity. You're trying to sell a product, sell a service, whatever, and you're not thinking holistically about the organization. You're not at the table.
Your scope of
Whoever you're
engagement
working
gets
for
very
might
narrow.
be at the table, but you're not.
Right.
So it just makes it more difficult for us to make a mark within
And
an
that
organization.
then precludes the public relations professional from functioning at a strategic level and adding strategic value
Exactly.
to the organization.
Exactly, because the problem then becomes that the strategy that you're implementing as a communication support function for marketing is that you're helping to implement a marketing strategy, and at a conceptual level, there's this overarching function that every organization needs. So there's got to be somebody there that's thinking about the organization and all of its stakeholders holistically. Everybody else has their silo, they all have a particular focus, and because of that, you do things that have unintended consequences, and those unintended consequences can be catastrophic. And I'll just give you one quick example. It's and as a former public affairs officer, you'll probably relate to this. You may recall that in Afghanistan, they discovered that prisoners of war were passing messages back and forth written into the Quran. Mm-hmm. And so somebody thought it would be a really good idea to confiscate all the Qurans and burn them. That ended up getting American soldiers killed. And so that's the problem with having everybody in the organization focusing on their own particular narrow objectives, and nobody's thinking about the big picture. And there's lots of other examples that we can come up with where if you had somebody thinking holistically about all of these strategic relationships that organizations have with constituencies, including in war, it's a public is the enemy, or prisoners of war are a group of people you have to be concerned about. And you need to think about these things holistically. And I don't think that the academy is training people to do that. I don't think practitioners are necessarily comfortable doing that. And I think that the professional associations or the trade associations are doing a very good job of promoting that. I do think they're more concerned about maintaining membership than moving us from a craft to a profession.
That's a very dangerous place for us to be as
Yes,
a profession. So in this study, towards the end, you had some very prescriptive recommendations for things that we ought to address to improve the situation. Would you like to go into those a little bit?
Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, we had basically a 4-point plan, and it was reasonable people can disagree, and we expect them to disagree. That was kind of our purpose of doing it, was to stimulate a dialogue rather than actually tell people that this is exactly the right way to do it. But we have some serious concerns about, collectively, folks in public relations reaching a consensus on a good definition of the practice. Our concern is that it ends up being this tactical communication support function, and if left to their own devices, we might end up doing that. So we need to agree on a definition of the practice. What is the practice? And it needs to be much like this ideal that we described, rather than what our comfort level is, what's easy to do, what's going to help PRSA and IABC maintain their membership. It needs to be something that really speaks to what good do we provide to organizations and what good do we provide to society if we want to aspire to professionalism. So that's step one. Figure out who we are and what we do. Second step, we need to respect the difference between strategic management function in public relations and the, if you will, the communication, technical support, journalist in residence role. It comes across, and I've been criticized for about 25 or 30 years for doing this, that managers are high, they're better, and there's these lowly technicians, and nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the excellent study showed us that excellent organizations have strategic managers running the communication department or the public relations department, but they also have excellent people that know how to implement communication programs. They have great creative, artistic practitioners as well as great strategic managers. And so that's key. We need to develop a track that allows us to say, okay, if you want to do this creative, artistic stuff, there are going to be consequences for that. Your life will be less stressful. You'll probably have a longer life expectancy, but you're not going to get paid as much money. On the other hand, there's this strategic management function, a parallel career track. It's more stressful. You may not live as long, but you're going to make a lot more money because you're providing a value added as somebody that helps organizations function better. So that's the second step in the process. Now, the third one is something we've encountered. At San Diego State, we have a program for military public affairs officers that started in 2005. And we get feedback from our officers that have, came in with a lot of professional experience. These are basically people that, when we talk about some of the problems they have in terms of being strategic thinkers and all of that, and the opposition they get from their commanding officers, they know exactly what we're talking about. They go back to the fleet and they encounter commanding officers who think, oh yeah, you're the person who takes pictures when we do cake cutting ceremonies, when in fact they could be helping with like much more sophisticated problems. So a third step is we need to educate the people that we work for in organizations, the dominant coalition, if you will. They need to understand that public relations is this much more sophisticated activity. Yes, we are the communication experts in your organization. Yes, we know how to put together messages. We know what the appropriate channels are, but we're also the experts in what's going on out there, and we can help improve the quality of your decisions because we know what's going on out there better than anybody else.
So we need
to get the people that we work for to understand the resources that a well-educated strategic public relations practitioner can provide.
Right. So we need to have a seat at the table so we can inform decisions, but we also need to be prepared to take on that role when we find ourselves at the table or earn our way to the table. So that was number 3.
And number 4 is, and this will probably be the one that a number of people will be most unhappy with, is that we like to call ourselves a professional. Professor Stacks has insisted here at the conference that we stop calling PR practitioners and stop calling them professionals. Well, professional actually has a very specific meaning, and we're not a profession. And in order to be a profession, you need to, first of all, have a body of knowledge, and I think we're there. We have to have a social benefit, a good that we provide to society, not just to our organizations, but good that we provide to society that justifies licensing. And so if you're going to be a real profession, you license people, and if they behave in an unethical manner, they get thrown out of the profession. Yeah, just same as doctors and lawyers. There are requirements that you behave in a professional manner, and that has very specific meanings and has very specific consequences when you don't behave in an ethical manner.
It has to be enforceable.
Has to be enforceable. And until we're there, we're not really a profession. Now, here's the thing that's interesting about that. One of the things that we argue in the paper is that as a public relations practitioner, you advocate on behalf of the public when you're talking to the dominant coalition. You're the person that goes, well, wait a minute, what about this? You're the person that knows what it's like to be or think like the folks outside of the organization and get people inside the organization to understand that while you might all be in consensus about this, a lot of folks out there don't look at the world that way, and you need to be sensitive to that. That's, I think, where we can argue a social benefit, a societal benefit from doing public relations ethically. So we're ethical for two reasons: because it's the right thing to do, and because it's the pragmatic thing to do. Because, and you'll have to decide whether you want to use this in your podcast, when it hits the fan, you're the folks that are going to have to go out and make excuses for it.
Right.
So it's to your advantage to make sure that doesn't happen. And so you have a lot of motivation to argue for ethical conduct to your organization. And if you had a professional society that says if you don't do that, you're behaving in an unprofessional manner, you can use the pressure of professional sanctions as a way to justify, look, I know you don't want to hear this, Mr. CEO or Ms. CEO, but I have a professional obligation to tell you that this is unethical. It's the wrong thing to do.
And here's an irony. This concept of licensing was pushed very hard and for decades by Ed Bernays, one of the real founders of our business. He should never get it done. We're talking about the advances of this of public relations, and yet he was pushing for this
In the 50s?
Yeah, and before.
And we're
30s.
still not there.
No, we're still not there.
So is it hopeless? Where do we go from here?
Oh, I'm a glass is half full kind of guy. I think we are making progress. I think it's going to be slow. I have some serious questions. My big serious question is, are we really, this is what I said earlier, are we getting the best and brightest? If we don't get the best and brightest, we will not make it. And I'm worried that that situation is, if not on top of us, at least close to us. So I think that really is the tipping point.
I think that from my point of view, when I first got to San Diego State, I'm going to always be grateful to the mentorship of Glenn Broom and help me clarify my thinking on the strategic management approach to public relations. I thought, okay, we're 5 years out. 5 years from now, everybody's going to be doing it the way we're training our students to do it, and then after I was there 5 years, okay, maybe 10 years. And so there's a part of me that says, well, this isn't happening very fast. But like a lot of things in life, things sometimes take a lot longer to accomplish than you think they will. And I see things to be optimistic about. Lou and I serve on the Commission on Measurement and Evaluation, and there's some excellent work being done there as practitioners and academics and vendors sit down and try to agree on things like, what do we mean by this, and how do we measure this, and again, as the Institute for Public Relations describes it, trying to build the science beneath the art of public relations. And so those are all very optimistic sorts of things. So I don't think it's hopeless at all. I just wish it would happen faster. I'm 66 years old, and I'd like to see it before I'm dead.
Right.
It may not happen that fast.
You've got 4 areas that we need to move forward in. If you could see one through, what would it be? What's the one next most important step?
I think the most important step is agreeing who we are and what we're about. And again, that is inherently problematic, because the easy answer is well, we're a communication support function. We're part of the marketing mix. And that's the easy answer. But then you're not public relations anymore, as far as I'm concerned. On a conceptual level, you're not doing public relations anymore. You're a publicist. And you're basically cranking out communication in support of marketing.
And your value proposition is entirely different.
Exactly.
So without that foundation, I think Dave's right. Without that foundation, nothing else happens. We need to understand that, and then we need to take that and build it into all of the elements of the business. University level, agency level, consulting level, organizational level, everywhere. that, because everything else will fall off of that.
Right.
I think that makes sense.
Do you think more recent developments like the Barcelona Principles and Barcelona 2 are going to help move us closer to the goal?
I think it's a step in the right direction. It's flawed, but it is helping. One of the Barcelona Principles is you don't use AVEs. People are still using them all the time, everywhere. I mean, it's everywhere. So how, they're not rule, you can't enforce anything. How do we make that happen? So, I mean, it's a step in the right direction.
Right.
I agree. I think it's a step in the right direction, but it's like everything else is, until we can get to the place where we're going to set standards and enforce standards on our practice, then it allows anybody with a credit card and access to, a photocopy shop to go down and have a business card printed that says, Dozier and Williams, or more accurately, Williams and Dozier's public relations, and we could be, street people with living out of a shopping cart,
Right.
and we'd still be, as much of a practitioner as somebody who, has APR or APR plus M.
A few years ago, I actually counted in the Yellow Pages in Chicago how many public relations firms there are in the Yellow Pages. Would you like to hazard a guess?
I have no idea.
372.
Wow.
Now, most of them are one-person shops, people who hang out that shingle.
Right.
We don't know who they are, where they're coming from, how they were trained, what knowledge they have, how ethical they are. We have no idea. They're just out there making this business.
So we've talked a lot, and it seems that we focus a lot on the supply side of the equation. Is there something we can do on the demand side? I mean, on the supply side, we're preparing people to enter the profession, and we are hopefully mentoring them as they progress in their careers. But what about on the demand side? Is there something we can do to create an expectancy that the public relations practitioners or professionals will be delivering more than just, I mean, you have to be a good technician, but coming in with the ability to speak the language of the business, to understand the nature of the business, to have a strategic perspective, to be able to think critically. I mean, all the things that go into making a good senior chief communications officer. On the demand side, to create that vacuum that might help move the profession along.
Doing the business will help do that, make that happen. That's an easy answer, and I'm not sure it's the answer you're looking for, but that really does help us. If we do good work, we get more work. Anybody who runs a business knows that. Builds a good product, you sell more product. Build a bad product, you sell less.
Deliver value, people want more of it.
Right.
I think in the excellence study, and I know we're talking about ancient history here, but it doesn't mean that just because it's old doesn't mean it's any less true now than it was when we did the research back in the 1990s. And one of the things we found intriguing and came out of the follow-up case studies, real quickly what we did is we had an index of excellence which had multiple measures of excellence, and this was all quantitative. And then we identified organizations that were excellent, and then in the euphemism of public relations, there were a bunch of organizations on the bottom of the scale that were less than excellent. And we went out to try to find out, why are you excellent and why are you less than excellent? And one of the things that we found about excellent organizations is that very often that they had some kind of a crisis where the importance of doing strategic public relations came to the fore. A great example of that is the oil industry. Without mentioning names, there were several petroleum companies that were in the study, and they basically had very excellent public relations department. That was in reaction to oil crisis. At that time, it was Exxon Valdez. Now it's BP. But the problem is that up to a particular point, the CEOs were basically engineers, and public relations was equated with publicity. And then you basically lay an oil streak along the Alaskan coast, and all of a sudden, public opinion's kind of important. And so they either hired new people or took advantage of people that might have been frustrated managers that had never been asked, how do we deal with this stuff? And they were doing some very sophisticated stuff in terms of measurement, environmental scanning, and all of this was due to a crisis either in the industry or that particular organization. That's kind of a pessimistic way of looking at it. Something bad's got to happen before you realize the importance of public relations. Maybe we can be more proactive. But I think that speaks to our third point, which was we need to educate dominant coalitions, if you will. We need to educate the top managers of organizations that public relations can do more for you than what you think they can do. And if you've got people that can't do this, then you need to get additional people that can help you with that.
Creating
you
the
might
expectation.
You might have like really great artistic, creative folks, great communicators, great at message design, really understand media relations, whatever. But there's nobody doing the strategic management aspect of public relations. And if you don't have somebody doing that, you need to get somebody to do that for you because it's too important. In an interconnected world, a shrinking globe, interconnected world where everybody's hooked up to communication, multiple channels of communication, two-way communication going back and forth like a spider web. You really need to have somebody that really knows what they're doing to provide the strategic thinking to make public relations and organizational effectiveness better than what it is now.
Totally agree. Shift gears real quick and briefly. What advice would you give to somebody who is either just starting their career or is relatively early in their career to prepare them for success and also to prepare them to be able to do what you just described, to deliver that value to their organization? What can they do to prepare themselves?
Well, I'll give you a couple things. One is take business courses, read, understand the business of business, I guess is a better way to put it, and get a foundation, the writing foundation. I don't care if it's Twitter or an annual report or the Bible. If you can't write well, it ain't read well. Mm-hmm. So you need to have that. David, you have a much more sophisticated answer.
I don't know. We'll see. Wait till I'm done before you say that. I think that this is kind of the mantra that we do at San Diego State with our undergraduates and now with our graduate program, and especially with public affairs officers, which is basically you need to stop thinking of yourself as a communicator only and start thinking of yourself as somebody that solves problems for organizations. And the minute you shift gears, and in fact I had this wonderful moment, young Marine who was going through the program, and at the end of the program she was turning in some loaner books that I'd given her, and she says, I got to level with you. When I first got here and you guys started talking about the strategic approach to public affairs, she said, I didn't know what you were talking about. It just didn't make any sense at all. But she said somewhere around week 2 or week 3, because we have this very intensive program where it's like 5 days a week, most of the day, and she said somewhere around week 2, all of a sudden it was like that. She says, I got it. It made sense. We aren't just simply distributing messages. We're basically solving or preventing problems for for the fleet, for the U.S. Marine Corps, the Department of Defense. And she's like, I got it. And after that, everything started to make sense in a totally different way. So there's almost like a mind shift that happens when you stop thinking of yourself as a journalist in residence, basically distributing messages for the Navy or the Marine Corps or, a large corporation or a NGO or whatever, and you stop thinking that way and you start thinking of yourself as a person who has to think about what are the relationships we have with our various constituencies, what are the potential threats to those relationships, and what can I do to make sure that those bad things don't happen. And my job is to basically solve problems before they become problems, or fix them while they're small problems rather than waiting until they're large problems.
Much more sophisticated answer.
They're both great answers, gentlemen. Thank you so much. How can listeners get in touch with you?
Lou, L-O-U, at lcw1.com.
Okay, and I'll include links and all the information in the show notes.
Yeah, best way to reach me is also email, which is ddozier@mail.sdsu.edu.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Always more complicated than I am.
Pleasure.
Thank you. It's my university is more complicated. And getting more complicated every day. Yeah.
Yes.
Used to be I had to fill out one piece of paperwork to come to this conference, another one when I got back. Now it's like 4 or 5. You know, it's like, so they couldn't have, like Dozier at San Diego State EDU. No, it's got to be the mail server because there are like 5 servers on campus.
Right.
So.
All right, thanks. That was fun.
This was fun. Thank you.
I appreciate the
Very
time.
nice.
Thanks for joining us for this conversation about a topic that's really important to our profession. I think Dave and Lou are really on to something vital here. As public relations professionals, whether we're scholars or practitioners or have a foot in both worlds, we have a vested interest in moving our profession forward toward a more strategic approach. As mentioned in the interview, this really is a long process, but we must keep moving forward. I'd love to hear what you think about their assessment and recommendations, as well as any questions that you'd like to have addressed on future episodes. Give me a shout by clicking the orange Send Voicemail tab on the right side of every page of the BetterPRNow.com website. It's a quick and really easy way to participate in this ongoing conversation. If you're enjoying the podcast, please share it with a friend. I'd also appreciate an honest review on iTunes. Thanks for taking this journey with me as we improve public relations one conversation at a time. I'll catch you on the next episode.